NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
Yesterday, I was in the bar, strangely enough, talking to some lawyers from West Palm Beach, Richard Lubin and some of his friends, and they said essentially, okay, hotshot, you're here to speak about jury selection in murder cases. What makes jury selection in murder cases different? And the truth is, the bodies are what make it different. I mean, when you think about it, a murder case is just trespass with a body. It's battery gone bad, so there's a body. It can be a white-collar crime, fraud and shit, with a body. It is certainly drunk and disorderly with a body, and so it is the body that makes the difference in murder cases. Now, these are strange times for jury selection. And this is the part I'd like to say, I know the answer, but I don't. The people who are in the trenches day after day, probably the public defenders in the room, may have a better fix on what's going on. The polarization in this country is undeniable. I mean, somebody tells you they voted for Donald Trump, and, I can't speak for anyone else, but for the most part, they're dead to me. And I'm sure that, I know I have friends that I say, well, I hate that. Look, we're criminal defense lawyers. Who here is going to be offended when I swear? Just raise your hands. I don't give a shit, but I just want to know who I'm going to piss off. I have friends that I'm sure when I say I hate that fucker, that I'm dead to them. There's this distrust of institutions. I don't know what, the president talking about how corrupt the FBI is, what impact that's going to have on our jurors. I don't know the answer to that. There is the violence in our country, the mass shootings. And I have this theory that most Americans suffer from secondary PTSD, if not direct PTSD, just as a result of seeing the mass shootings, reading about the mass shootings, seeing on social media with the cops shooting people. You can witness murders in 3 keystrokes. The racism that's out there. It was always there. We know it was always there, but now it is out. It is public. And it's showing up, I think, more openly in courtrooms. And then there's social media. And, I was sitting in the back of the room and, people were listening to the speakers and then checking Facebook and listening to the speakers and checking Twitter and then listening to the speakers and checking Snapchat. And all of that has an impact on our jury pools. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're talking about how to pick juries, how to get people to tell you their secrets. Now, I know that there's a wide group of, people from all over, and when I talk about jury selection, this shit's making me crazy. I'm just an ordinary guy, lucky. And there's a lot of people in this room who may not get attorney-conducted voir dire, where the judges won't do it, or they practice in federal court where the judges won't do it. And that would be a whole separate lecture of ways to get attorney-conducted voir dire. But I think it bears repeating why we need it. We will get more accurate information from the prospective jurors than the judges. Unquestionably. Why? Because they do it badly. The best judge I've ever seen doesn't know how to do jury selection. Most of them were former prosecutors. A lot of them don't care. They don't like it. They will screw it up. And there's a reason for that. I mean, even if they try to do it well, there's this concept known as social distance. And social distance is nothing more than the notion that we don't talk as openly with people we see as having more power. Whether it's wealth, whether it's position, that's human nature. And how many of you, if you go to a bar function, a party where there's alcohol being served, and there's a judge there you know, tell him or her what a dumb SOB you think they are? I'm going to guess not very many, because that's social distance. And the social distance between jurors and judges is astronomical. I was in a trial, white-collar case. The judge says to the jurors, it's going to be 2 weeks. We picked the jury on Monday. Tuesday, we're getting ready for opening statements. And the clerk comes in and says, juror number 6 is in the jury room sobbing. So the judge brings her out. What's the problem? She says, well, trial's supposed to be 2 weeks. Yeah, I'm getting married on Saturday, and I'm supposed to be on my honeymoon the second week of the trial. Well, okay, that's fine. You'll be excused. Why didn't you tell us? Well, I was scared, Your Honor. That's just social distance at work. So we need to fight for attorney-conducted jury selection, and some thoughts on how to get it for those of you who have this fight. You're entitled to meaningful voir dire on race. That's the one thing that is unquestioned in this time where we have the polarization, where we have the distrust of institutions, where we have the overt racism. I suggest you can say to your judges, look, judge, this is in this courtroom whether you want to pretend it is or not. And we have a right to know the jurors' attitudes. And let me just say this, race is in virtually every case. If the client is black, race is in the case. If witnesses are of color, race is in the case. If jurors are of color, race is in the case. If anyone who has anything to do with the case is of color or a different color, race is in the case. And you need we can't pretend that's not the case. And so the closed-ended question that the judges often ask, sir, I noticed that I'm sure you can tell the defendant's African-American or Hispanic, and I'm going to tell you a lot of the victim here is white. Will that make a difference to you in how you see the case? And of course, the dumbest Klansman alive is going to say, hell no. And so, those closed-ended questions are meaningless. And we have to press the judges so that we make a record on that. So, principle number 1 of jury selection. There is no jury. There are only jurors. I've heard lawyers say, planning for a trial, well, the jury's not going to like the fact that I have to cross-examine the cops. The jury's not going to like the bloody photographs. The jury is not going to like X, Y, or Z. Well, frankly, that's bullshit. You don't know who the jury is. You don't know who your jurors are. Our job is to find jurors who will understand that we have the responsibility to question the cop, who can look at the pictures and be dispassionate, who can deal with the things in our case that frighten us. So the notion that we can know before the trial what the jury will or will not like is, I think, really a reflection of our fear, of my fear, when I say that, as opposed to what's really out there. Principle number 2 of jury selection, and there's a little story associated with this. Those of us who are older, who are in the room, Richard Lubin, Joe Guastafaro, who incidentally is one of the great jury consultants in America, some of the older people that I look around, will have known or worked with Kathy Bennett, who was the wellspring of modern jury selection. I'm very much a disciple of hers. Virtually everything I'll talk about originally comes from her. And not too long after she died, which was probably 20 years ago, I was invited to speak in Kentucky to the Kentucky Public Defenders about jury selection, and they don't hold their meetings in fancy, big cities like Louisville or Lexington. This was in Jabez, Kentucky. And I'm not going to knock small Kentucky towns where there's only 3 names on the mailboxes, the Wilsons, the Joneses, and the Smiths. It could be an accident that the family trees maybe don't have so many branches. I don't know. In any event, I'm driving along and I come by the Mount Pisgah Baptist Church. And they have the little signs out front. John 3:16. It's Easter, let's kill all the Jews. The little signs they have. And there was the sign that day really sums up everything we need to know about jury selection, and frankly, everything that I learned from Kat Bennett. And so I will say, for those of you who want to take notes on this stuff, when a little Jewish guy from Indiana stops in front of the Mount Pisgah Baptist Church in Jabez, Kentucky, you might want to write this down. What we say is who we are. What we say is who we are. Jury selection is nothing more than getting jurors to tell you who they are about the issues in your case that frighten you, so that you can decide whether they're the right juror for this case. So all you need to do is find ways to get them to talk about what's important in the case and what's important to you. Now, there are a couple of impediments to this. The first is the number one fear of Americans is speaking in public. In fact, the 3 biggest fears, the third biggest fear of Americans is death. The second biggest fear of Americans is snakes. And the biggest fear of Americans is fear of speaking in public. Now, what that means, how that translates for us, is the jurors in your courtroom would rather die by being covered with snakes than talk to you. So that's an impediment to overcome. Also, they don't want to be embarrassed. They're in front of a whole room full of people. If you call on them or the judge calls on them about issues they probably haven't thought about, they just don't want to be embarrassed. So how do we overcome, make them believe this, this is not as bad as snakes? And we have tools, and every one of you has these tools. You use them every day. There is nothing magic about this. It's just when I'm guilty of this, we walk into the courtroom and we put on our lawyer persona and our brains leak out our fucking ears. Because we just need to talk, and show the world how smart we are. How do we overcome this? First, open-ended questions. If you hate nothing else, open-ended questions to the jurors are important. Why? Because his answer might be different than her answer, which might be different than her answer, which might be different than his answer. And that takes away, if nothing else, when the judge is trying to speed it up and they call the second panel and says, would your answers be different than the prior jurors? And the juror says, no, of course not. Then you get to say, well, which one? Because he answered it different than her. Who do you agree with? Who do you disagree with? Plus, it gets them talking. No judgments. Now, the answer to this question is Donald Trump. Okay? And I want it clear, I am feeding him the answer. I don't know this man. I mean, I saw him speak. I'm pretty sure that's not the truthful answer, but I'm feeding it to him. So, who did you vote for in the last election?
Donald Trump.
So, sir, are you racist?
No.
Stupid?
No.
What the hell is wrong with you? Now, how is she going to respond when I want to ask her a question, having just embarrassed him? She's 6 men and a wild monkey will not get the answer out of her once I've embarrassed him. So you cannot use judgments. And think about it. Every answer a juror gives us is a gift. It is priceless. And there's no reason to use judgments. They have the right to their opinion, and that's important. Silence. Silence next to open-ended questions and no judgments is the critical thing. Because here's what happens. Let me ask you this. How many of you find that when you ask a question, the jurors won't respond? They sort of sit there mute. Okay. And again, social distance, fear of embarrassment. I suspect a lot of you really wanted to raise your hands but don't want to. That's what happens to all of us. If you go, you can't tell it on the transcripts, but if you go watch, what you will see is the lawyer asks the question, "Sir, my client is not going to testify. What do you think?" Now remember, the juror's afraid. He doesn't want to be embarrassed. He really is hoping that the snakes will come and carry him away. And he probably has never thought about this in his entire life. So he's trying to figure out what to do. So what's going on is a battle between his anxiety and ours. And what happens is we are verbal. We're comfortable talking in court. So when there's this silence, which feels like forever, it's generally about 10 seconds, the lawyer tends to fill it in. And when that happens, the juror has the psychological freedom to stay silent. And so when you watch that, watch and see. What you have to do, what we have to do, is have the courage to ask a question, either of an individual or the group, and have the courage to stand there silently. In less than 15 seconds, somebody will say something or somebody will move in a way that you will know you have permission to call on them. Ms. Jones, it looks like you have some thoughts on this. Mr. Smith, you had something you wanted to tell us. But we have to use silence to give them the opportunity to fill it. We can't let our anxiety overwhelm theirs. You have to listen. The next question, for those of you who are always worried, well, shit, I don't know what I'm going to ask. I have to have it all written down. The next question is in the juror's prior answer. Always. And when you're stuck, when you just absolutely, as we all do, your mind goes blank. Tell me more. Tell me more. Why do you feel this way? How did you come to that? Anything to keep it going. Tell me more. You will never go wrong with tell me more. Eye contact. Look at people. Now, I don't mean stalker eye contact, none of that shit. But look at people, because we live in this culture where we kind of look over people's left or right shoulder, sort of making the notion of, well, okay, I'm talking to Nellie, but I'm really looking for somebody better. Maybe that just happens to me. I don't know. I mean, that wouldn't surprise me. But the point is, if we just look at somebody, we are learning, because 80% of all human communication is nonverbal. You were drawing judgments about me before, that kind introduction just when sort of seeing me around. People learn about people just by watching. So eye contact is really important. Congruence and empathy. That just means being appropriate to the situation. If a juror says something funny, it's okay to laugh. You know, I was in a trial one time, and empathy is just, again, being appropriate. I was in a trial, and it was another white-collar case, and the prosecutors, they always do. Anyone here been the victim of a crime? You know, little old lady, the nicest woman you have ever met, raises her hand and says, "Yes, sir, about 2 weeks ago, I was walking down the street, some people knocked me over, they grabbed my purse and ran away." Prosecutor's next statement is, "Well, this is a tax case. Would that affect your ability to be fair and impartial?" Well, of course not. Thank you. And he moves on. Well, I stand up and, I can't help myself. I said, "Ma'am, before we have any questions, I just need to know, are you okay?" And there was this sigh from the rest of the courtroom because everyone else in the room had that same question. They just wanted to know that she was all right. And so it's just a matter of treating people the way you would want to be treated. Clarification. They're human beings. They say things we don't understand. Rather than assume you understand, just ask. "Help me, sir, I'm not tracking. It's not your fault, it's mine. What are you trying to tell me?" No notes. Critical in murder cases. Someone's got to take notes. Not you. Your trial partner, a secretary, a paralegal, but in murder cases, not your client. When jurors are being asked about, like, where do you work and do you have a family? And, tell me your greatest fears, and Fred the axe murderer has got some paper in hand, that will make them, that's worse than snakes. Okay? Now, but the reason we don't take notes, there's another reason we let somebody else take notes. Let's just pretend that at the cocktail party tonight, I see this lady and I decide my life will not be complete. She has already given me the look of death. If you could see her eyes, it's like, "Come near me and I'm going to kill your ass." And I decide I just need to get to know her. And so I come up and I go, "Hi, I'm Rick. What's your name?" "Melanie." With an I or a Y? I-E. I-E, okay. And your last name, Melanie I-E? Morgan. She doesn't even want to answer. Morgan, oh. Come here often? Often. How's this going to go? Huh? First, it's weird when you're having a conversation with somebody to take notes. Secondly, it breaks off the communication. I can't have a communication if I'm going away to write stuff on the piece of paper. So let somebody else take notes, not your client. Self-disclosure. Now, this is where it's going to get weird for some of you. Because we have to put our stuff out there. Now, there's always been the notion, if the juror's a golfer and you golf, you tell them, I golf, and, that way we'll become buddies, and, that'll make all the difference in the world. And I suppose on some level it does, but that's not what I'm talking about. Self-disclosure equals trust. If you have a conversation with somebody, and you share something of yours that is important, that says in a very powerful way, I trust you. I trust you with this information. And it is almost always reciprocated with equal or greater information. And I can't stress that enough. What we as lawyers do, and judges do this too, when we say, okay, I'd like to now discuss with you the notion of prejudice. How many of you in the room would classify yourself as being prejudiced? You're not going to get any hands raised except the people who understand that's my way out of here. Okay. Because that is the functional equivalent. I won't go to that side of the room. I'll go to this side of the room of going up to somebody at the cocktail party. I've never met this woman before in my life. And I say to her out of the blue, so tell me, what are your favorite sexual positions? That's what we're doing. When we do that stuff without sharing ours first, just trying to see who's paying attention, we're not going to get anywhere. Now, it may come up, I won't go. In any event, we need to put our stuff out there that's appropriate to the case. Now, there's this school of thought about educating the jurors. And if you live in a place where you have unlimited voir dire, I think Connecticut has sort of unlimited individual voir dire. There you may be able to spend some time educating the jurors. But if you live in a place where the judge is going to limit you, then you have to ask yourself, do you really want to spend your time talking about proof beyond a reasonable doubt or the presumption of innocence? Or are there things that are more important in your case? And the human dynamic here is that all of us, everyone in this room, everyone out there, can't appreciate or accept things that are contrary to our experience. If my view of the world is that an innocent guy would testify, nobody in this room can talk me out of that. None of us are that good. We can maybe get somebody to say the magic words, but that's not going to change their deeply held belief. They will hold on to the ideas they come up with. Other jurors may talk them out of that. But we're lawyers. And jurors naturally have their BS meters on when we're talking. And so when we're trying to educate them, I think it's getting filtered through the prism of this is BS. But if we can get them talking, they may change each other's mind. Making a connection. Let me ask you this. How many of you are public defenders? Okay. So, public defenders. When I was does this sound familiar for the public defenders? I was a public defender. I'd get a case. And I would not say to myself, I wonder what this poor, wrongfully accused citizen is alleged to have done. I would say to myself, what has this dumb MF done that has gotten him in trouble, and do we have any shot of disrailing the wheels of justice? The truth is, if we're honest, we don't give, and we shouldn't give our clients the presumption of innocence. That's a courtroom standard. We assume, and it's true, most people who get arrested, probably there was some reasonably good reason for them to be arrested. Not always, absolutely, but sometimes. The jurors are not stupid. They know what's going on in the world. They may have a better sense of what's going on in the world than we do. But they know if this guy is sitting in the courtroom on trial for murder, there's probably a good reason for him to at least be in the courtroom. And so they're no different. we started with, I wonder what he did, and then we learn more of the case, and we go, aha, there's a defense here, or aha, he's innocent. Well, the jurors are like us when we get the case. I wonder what he did. And our job is to show them the rest of the story. The aha, he's not guilty. The aha, he's innocent. The ideas they have are not crazy. It is not crazy to think an innocent guy would testify. We know the reasons why, but that's not a crazy notion. It's not crazy to think that people would not confess to things they didn't do. We know that that's true, but that's not a crazy notion. The things that frighten us, the attitudes jurors may have, are not crazy. And they deserve our understanding and respect. And finally, the issues you are afraid to talk about are the things in your case, are the most dangerous issues in the case. A friend of mine is a psychologist who says the things in our lives we're afraid to talk about are the things we can't manage. That's, when I can't talk about the problems in my life, that's when it's about to spin out of control. Well, it's the same way with cases. The things we're afraid to talk about on our cases are the most dangerous issues. Own the bad facts. This is critical. Now, what are the bad things in murder cases? Murder, mayhem, and malice. What are the bad things that we're afraid of? Help me here. Photos. Wow, who knew? What else? Surveillance tapes. What else? Confessions. What else? I'm sorry? Experts. Okay, yeah. The prior speaker was talking about how much weight jurors give to experts. What else? The body. The eyewitness ID. The co-defendant testimony. The victim testimony, the survivor, the wife, the widow, the person who's going to be up there understandably upset and crying. The violence in the case. The sheer violence sometimes in some of the cases. Those are the things that frighten me, and I suspect those are the things that frighten many of you. And then race and culture. If the defendant is black, if the defendant is Hispanic, in this day and age, it is there. So I'm going to give you a format, a structure for jury selection. What about the case scares you the most? If you are limited in time, and in Indiana, I've practiced in front of judges who will say you'll have 20 minutes to voir dire the jury in this murder case. And, in federal court, sometimes we're fighting for 20 minutes. So what about the case scares you the most? What is it that makes you wake up in the middle of the night thinking, holy shit, what am I going to do about this? And that will vary from case to case. It may be the photos, it may be the confession, it may be the eyewitness identification, but you need to identify that in your own mind. And then ask yourselves, how do I feel about that? Why is it the photos bother me so much? What about these particular photographs frighten me? What about race in this case frightens me? What about the confession in this case frightens me? And why does it frighten me? What is there in me that makes me afraid of this? And then you tell the jurors. Honest self-disclosure. And it may sound something like this. Sir, when I first began representing Jim Bob, I read the file and I saw that the police say he confessed. And my first reaction was, I don't know what we're going to do here, and I don't know if we have any options here. I learned more about it, and I learned it's more complicated. But I wanted you to have that information about me. So I'm curious, as you know the world, would an innocent person confess to a crime they didn't commit? And then you sit silently until somebody nods or says something and you start the conversation. But you share your truth about this fact first. And that's on everything. Race is especially important. But everything that frightens me. Because in the end, we're no different than the jurors. They hear about a confession, they're thinking, well, shit, case closed. If they come in and they've got this race stuff going on, and we've got to get them to talk about it, but you can't ask somebody to talk about something you're not willing to talk about. So you've got to put your stuff out there first. Whatever they say, honor that view. Because principle number 3 of jury selection, the most important thing, it's number 3, but it's probably the most important thing. There are no bad answers. Please, make that part of your DNA. There are no bad answers. Now, what's the worst answer you guys can imagine hearing in a courtroom? Help me. What's the worst answer you can imagine hearing in a courtroom? If he's sitting there, he must be guilty. What else? I want to hear from the defendant. If he's innocent, he ought to testify. What else? I can be completely neutral. Absolutely. I can be completely neutral with my fingers crossed. What else? Cops don't lie. What else? Silence. Well, if you're patient, you'll overcome the silence. What else? Race doesn't matter. I'm colorblind. What else? I have no opinion on this. Right. I've never thought about it. What else? I will share with you the worst answer I ever heard in a courtroom. Mr. Kammen, I read about your client's other murders in the newspaper. Now that's a bad fucking answer. But since we had been arguing for individual voir dire because we knew that this was in the newspapers and the judge said no, that led to the striking of an entire panel and a 3-week continuance while they regrouped it. And remember this, a continuance is just as good as an acquittal. It just doesn't last as long. The real question is not, can you be fair and impartial? That's, the jurors, they don't get a vote on that. That's your decision. The real question is, as you know the world, given these facts, what do you think? Because what we say is who we are. As you know the world, or, the other question, look, he confessed. I'm telling you, he confessed. And the fight in this case is whether it's a real confession. But he confessed, so do we bother to have a trial? That's the ultimate question, given this fact, given these photographs, given the confession, given the eyewitness identification, given whatever it is that frightens you, do we bother to have a trial? Invariably, if you ask that question, a juror will say, of course. And then, my response is, well, yeah, I mean, we're here, but is this just a show trial where we all know how it's going to turn out? Or is this for real? And invariably, someone will say, for real? Well, I'm telling you, he confessed, or the witness is going to say he did it. How can we bother to have a trial? The jurors understand the world if we just give them the opportunity to tell us who they are. Some of them will tell us that they shouldn't be here. And that's okay too, because the goal is to exercise peremptory challenges if necessary. What do you do with the information? The juror says, I'm going to convict your guy. I have no opinion. I haven't thought about it. Something that makes you believe they're not with you. Believe them. You're not going to change their minds. If the juror says, I can be fair, I have no opinion, look behind the words. And the fundamental question is, do you believe them? Don't chase the one good answer. Don't get seduced by, all of us have been seduced by a juror who says the magic words, and you're thinking, man, if this guy's telling the truth, he's the greatest juror who ever lived, but something in your, and you're going, I don't know. And every time I've made a mistake, it's because I didn't trust the I don't know. And so when the I don't know, when you're just not buying it, is going off, strike them. Trust your gut. 80% of all communication is nonverbal. So you're learning things that are much more important than the words. Every one of us in this room has probably been in some circumstances conned. Business, personal relationships. We all look back on things where we say, I should have known better. I knew she was crazy. I knew he was nuts. I knew he was a stalker, whatever it was. We've all been there, and and when we look back, we always say, I had this sense and I didn't trust myself. So trust your instincts. Don't be seduced by the one good answer. The critical question is, do I believe him? The silent juror. If you have the time, you need to talk to every juror. Silence does not mean agreement. How many of you think the defendant should testify or doesn't have to testify, and the person doesn't raise their hand? Doesn't mean they agree. It might mean they're afraid. It might mean that they're, a stealth juror who wants to be on the jury. Silence does not mean agreement. If possible, you need to speak to every juror about what's important in the case, and there's a dispute among lawyers, even if it means outing a good juror. Because sometimes I've heard people say, well, I don't want to talk to that juror because he seems good, and I'm afraid that if he identifies himself and I'm right, the prosecutor will strike him. Fair enough. But what if he or she is not good? What if they're not the knight in shining armor we hope they are going to be? So you need to talk to every juror. And, there's this fight between deselection and inclusion. And I think that's largely semantic. The goal is to strike the jurors who shouldn't be there, who really cannot see the case through or deal with the issues that are frightening. But if you have a short time, if you only have 20 minutes or a half an hour to talk to a panel, you may not know enough to meaningfully strike everybody. You'll identify some of the worst, but you may miss some. But the reason we talk about self-disclosure, the reason we talk about being open and honest and embracing the bad facts in the case is because you can build a community. If I'm honest and I say, look, here's the problem in my case. We have these pictures that I'm afraid of. And let me tell you why I'm afraid of them. We have this confession I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of how race plays in this case. We are the people in the courtroom being honest. We are the people in the courtroom who are having the courage to be credible. And you can build a community of 13. 12 jurors looking to you for the truth. And when you do that, you have a much, much better chance at success. Thank you all very, very much.